Hello, welcome everyone to our final speaker series. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring this entire run. We've been doing this since the beginning of this mentorship session back in September. And it's been going really well. Getting a lot of people seem to be really viewing these on YouTube during and after the fact, which is great. I know a few of our streams have over 100 views, which is awesome. It means it's working. It's great. And with this series, we tried to go over the life of a game, right? We started with Matt's overview of like what you're going to go through when you try to make a game, right? And each series, we're going to go through one of those steps. So we went through design, we went through graphic design, art, publishing, all the good stuff. And now that we are arrived at the point where your game is out there, it's published. How are going to people find out about it? Well, that, of course, is through content creation, reviewers, and things like that. So we're going to talk about today about how a game gets spread around and what it takes to actually do that. And here with us today is reviewer and photographer extraordinaire, Eric Yurko. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be on.
Awesome. So like I was saying, this is the last one. We're really excited to end with you here and talk about what happens after a game's released, and how does it find its way into the hands of people, and when they're looking for like, what's the latest game, what's the latest hotness, is this even good, does it deserve to be the latest hotness, and how that process of making that content actually happens and what it takes. And this is the topic that I think a lot of our mentees are really curious about, our designers, publishers, and content creators. So, and it looks like we got already a bunch of people in the room saying hi and hello. So hello to everyone.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm super excited to be able to just sit down, answer some questions, standard stuff.
Yeah. So let's get started with a real easy one. Eric, why don't you let the fine folks know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Eric Yurko. I'm a writer and photographer for a website called What's Eric Playing, named that way because often people ask me what I am playing, and I get very stressed when I think about having to name things, so I just went for the lowest hanging fruit. It took me, so we're clear, it took me 2 weeks to hit that lowest hanging fruit of just rolling around being like, is this the right thing? But yeah, it's fine. A lot of people now ask me, so what's Eric? And I'm like, Please stop that.
Oh.
It's worse if I say it, but hearing it is also challenging for me. But so I write about games, I review games, I do photography for games, and then I talk a little bit more about games and the industry at large on my Twitter. So that's What's E-Playing. Turns out this is how you know that I didn't plan this. Twitter has a 15 character limit on usernames, and What's Eric Playing is, I believe, exactly 16. And I'm like, just one of those days where you're making the Twitter and you're like, man, this is going to be perfect. We're aligned on brand. Oh, this doesn't fit. Cool. Yep. Thanks, Twitter. Just did me a solid there.
Oh, that's great. Let me see here. So how did you get started in what led you basically to be like, I'm just going to take amazing photos and review board games?
Well, so the first step is actually taking really bad photos. So I will very much say that while I will never cop to my photos being that good, because like many millennials, I am terrible at receiving compliments. I still actually have, I went back through a few years ago and redid a few of the front page photos for a few of my games, because I was like, yes, these are the photos that I always took of these. I know how to do photos.
You're kidding.
Some of them were really rough. It's just a thing. But how I got started was largely a set of processes and set of conversations. So it's 2015. I've finished my master's, and after going from grad school, where I was doing grad school and work all the time, I'm going to just doing work all the time. And now there is no grad school. So I have 16 of my hours free every day. And I'm like, oh, well, what do I do now? I've recently discovered Netflix. So that's been exciting. But now how do I fill the days? So I'm talking to a friend. One of my friends at the time was writing a food blog where she basically cooked every recipe that was present in Final Fantasy XIV, which is great because I love this conversation was from 5 years ago, and yet Final Fantasy XIV is still up and running enough. This isn't dated at all. So in 10 years from now, when people are still watching this probably on like a repeat of this. They're like, oh yeah, I'm still playing Final Fantasy 14. Good job, Square Enix. But she's like, have you ever considered writing? And I'm like, well, I haven't ever done any like writing before, so what I write about? And she's like, well, what do you know? And I was like, well, I've been playing a couple board games. She's like, maybe you could write about board games. I'm like, maybe I could. So I decided to give that a whirl, and I've been kind of doing that ever since. So,
did you start out reviewing, or did you start out sort of blogging about it?
Just reviewing. So basically, like taking a game that I've enjoyed, writing what I liked about it, what I think other people might like about it, and just sort of iterating on it from there. So the first maybe 10 or 15 of them were kind of me settling in on a format. And largely, maybe after like 70 or 80, I started adding the like, what's the difference between various player counts sort of setup, because I think people ask that question a lot, like, okay, is this game better at 2? Is it better at 4, etc.? But I really just kind of wanted to think a little bit more, I guess, critically about how I thought about games and how other people could think about games. And so I sort of wove that into my writing. Yeah, beyond that, I've always been kind of reviewing. The first thing that I wanted to do, though, was I wanted to make sure that before I like launched the site, I had maybe like 10 or 15 reviews sort of banked, so that if I fell down the stairs, I would have some like backup content, so I would be consistent. Because the most important thing when you're starting out is consistency, right? A lot of people will ask like, okay, how do I get a publisher to start sending me free games? Which is an energy that you can bring to a conversation. Can't recommend that being like your first, like, I am getting into reviewing because I want to trade my time for games. Because as it turns out, that time money evaluation isn't quite as good as you might think it is. But generally consistency. So publishers want to be able to look at a content creator and say, are they publishing content on a regular schedule? Or am I just sort of throwing this game into the ether and then they're never publishing anything about it ever again? Like, you know, I mean, I assume that there is someone with a wagon who is like, yes, I've now convinced every publisher to send me these games and I will disappear into the night forevermore. But that's not necessarily like what publishers want to support.
Right, absolutely. No, so that gets to another question I had. You know, you're at the point now where you're getting publishers' games sent to you and things like that. But if one were to get started, what do? Do you just review games you own? Is there a way to get somehow to get like comp games to maybe from smaller companies, something like that?
You almost certainly have to start by reviewing games that you own. I think that's just the best way to get going, because you just don't really have enough of a like, it's not credibility as much as it is sort of like, you don't have enough of a like established presence to be able to say, oh, you can trust that I'm going to make this content for you on some schedule, right? And also it gives you a sense of, I think that a lot of people tend to like, so I know that there's some like internet bend towards like people who are very negative about games. Some people really like that kind of energy. You see it from like Zero Punctuation, like people who are very like shouty about games. That's fine. But I think some people really like to see what delights people about a game that they're playing, and sort of, you might like this game because it delighted me for these reasons, and I think that's why I'm recommending it. So going through your own collection and picking out some of your favorites and writing about what parts of those things delights you is a great way to understand what about creating content about games sort of brings you joy, to paraphrase Marie Kondo. But it's also a good way to do the more challenging task, which is what about your favorite games do you not like?
Yeah.
So like when I was just getting started, right, we played so much Catan, and we played so much Bang, and we played so much The Resistance Avalon. And going through that, I was like, okay, what do I like about Catan? I like how colorful it is. I like the construction problems. I like the resource gathering, and like the kind of unfairness of the dice is kind of funny to me sometimes. I really don't like the unbounded trading mechanic, because I've definitely seen something like, oh, if you give me 2 ore, I will take out the trash for a week. And you're like, hey, I don't think that that's, and they're like, doesn't say that you can't. And I'm like, okay, we can't have Airbud rules in a like board game.
Right.
All right, we can't be like, oh, the rules don't say a dog can't play Catan. But
it's true.
Yeah, like rule books are permissive, they're not restricted, but that's an entirely different conversation. But yeah, no, or like going through Bang, I loved the roles, I loved the like hidden identity, I liked the way you could like build up your defenses. I didn't like the player elimination. And so learning how to build out that contrast set was really critical for me to be able to look at a game that I may not feel so strongly about and be like, okay, this game I'm kind of neutral on, but what do I think it does really well? Sometimes it's like, oh, it has really inviting art and the component quality is really good. What it doesn't do so well is I feel like it doesn't do a good job expanding itself to additional players. Like as more players enter the game just takes longer. And I'm like, that makes it hard to bring to a game night where you're like, okay, how long is this game going to take to play? And you're like, well, that depends on how many people want to play it, which is generally a bad answer.
Right, right. Had you thought about these things before you were committing to reviewing them, or were these things you had to like dig deeper once you decided, oh, I'm going to really look at this game?
I think everyone kind of thinks about it a little bit, right? Because everyone who plays if you played a board game, or if you played a board game at a convention, or if you played a board game where people are walking by, eventually someone's going to be like, oh, what's this game? And you'll like tell them a little bit about it, and you're like, is it any good? And you can be like, well, I like this, I don't like this. And they'll be like, oh, okay, well, thank you for telling me. And then they'll sort of walk off. It's really just a crystallization of those conversations, right? It's that my friends knew me as the guy who owned a lot of the board games that we would play. And so rather than me continually saying, oh, I don't love Catan's unbounded trading mechanic, I could just be like, yeah, I wrote something about it the other day. You can just skim that. Which a lot of people did. Honestly, that's one of the reasons that the audience that I write for is more me than anything else, because after like, not to toot my own horn too aggressively, but after writing like 700 reviews, I don't totally remember everything about every game that I've ever played. And so sometimes if someone's like, oh, we're thinking about getting this game for our family for Christmas, is it any good? I'll be like, and I'll just go back and look at my old review of it and be like, oh yeah, I remember this now. Like just jogs the memory. I once like Near and Far has a 40-page rule book, and I needed to teach it to some friends, but I hadn't played it in a year. And I was like, I really wish I had a way to teach this more efficiently without having to just read the rulebook to them. And I looked and I had a review of it up, so I just read my own reviews, gameplay instructions, and I was like, oh yes, I remember how to do this now. Because it's all written in my own voice, right? It's just me like throwing a bone into the future for future me.
That's amazing. Wow, the side benefits you never really think about when you start these endeavors.
Yeah, I'd argue that might be even worth considering as the primary benefit, because if you write for yourself as the audience, you're never as like, if someone says like, I don't like these reviews, you're like, well, that's fine. Like, I'm not writing for you as my primary audience. I'm writing for me as my primary audience. And if I'm satisfied with what I'm writing, if other people are too, that's great. But at the end of the day, it needs to come back to like, what intrinsic benefit do I derive from my own writing? Not necessarily relying on the like extrinsic benefit of other people commenting like, this is the best review I've ever read for this game, which like, no one does that.
Right. No, that's that's a fantastic point. You've hit on a lot of stuff that's great. Is that like, you don't start out good, but you should start out writing for yourself, because eventually that's the voice you're going to find, right?
Right. I think there was maybe a quote from Adventure Time, I want to say, where someone said like, sucking at something is the first step to being really good at something. And like, that's kind of how it's going to be, right? You're not going to, some people are, don't get me wrong. Like there are some people who are like, hi, welcome to my channel. This is my first video. Like my lighting's perfect. I've got the perfect like transcription. I've got the perfect like camera angles. And I'm like, well, Godspeed, buddy. Like,
right.
And that's great. Happy for them. But for others, like, yeah, I still get comments on like my blog posts every now and then where someone's like, I think you stopped in the middle of a paragraph and then forgot to get back to it. And I was like, I did do that. Thank you for noticing. So you just go back and you're like, oh, let me just finish this thought.
Yeah.
Like I link to my posts on BGG sometimes, and the links are wrong half the time. So there's someone who people have now realized that if they comment and they tell me the link is wrong and I fix it, I will give them 5 geek gold to say thank you for catching my mistake and then move on and fix it. Because I'm just like, that's fine. I make a lot of geek gold from posting photos. So like, this is an economy that works for everybody.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get a few questions from our audience. Thank you so much. And please put questions in the chat. Before we get to this question, I want to ask real quick, let's just go right to the beginning.
Sure.
When you get started, how many reviews do you think you should have in your buffer before you hit publish on the first one?
I think it depends on your pace per week. So it's going to depend on a couple things. So like I write very long form review content, right? Like we're talking like 2,000 to 4,000 words. Like you're just going to read a lot of text about this game because as you might already have guessed from this conversation, I'm a little bit wordy. But for some
like
people,
conversation, your reviews are easy to read, even though they're long. They're a breeze. Because
I appreciate that.
Oh, absolutely. You write in a real voice. Anyway, I could go on, but
I try very hard to write in general online, talk exactly the same way as I try to chat online the same way that I talk in real life, so that way it keeps some consistency. It's not great for my job where I'm trying to do more like technical writing, but that's a different conversation. But yeah, so I think if you're going for things like, there are people who can make a perfectly fine and viable like review form out of just like tweeting out their thoughts on the game, first impressions, like brap, and just collating them somewhere. For that, you don't even really need that much of a buffer, right? Your main gate is going to be how quickly can you get games played. Mm-hmm. For me, my buffer is usually, I prefer to have several weeks done in advance, especially when we hit like, so I'm describing a mythical time. So a long time ago, there was a thing called con season, where people would actually get on these like large metal birds and go places to be in rooms with lots of other people all playing board games. It's odd. So like from just an archaeological understanding, from an anthropological understanding of this, these are things that used to happen. And in that season, I would try to have a larger buffer, because it would be helpful if I was attending a con to not have to worry at the con, like, oh, do I need to be writing a review while I'm at a con, which is hard to do because it's just like a noise thing. But yeah, generally in a more charitable age, I would have probably about 4 weeks of content buffered. Right now I have 2.5 to 3.5 weeks buffered, and I have an emergency stash that's just a bunch of reviews that I wrote for games that I haven't published for one reason or another, just mostly because I'm like, oh, I got this game, I didn't make a commitment to a publisher that I was going to publish it. I just wrote this review because I thought it would be fun, and I am saving it for in case that I need it. So like at the very beginning of the year, when like lockdown started for us, or I guess when lockdown started, that is now continuing, I had no infrastructure to get games played, right? We were all just kind of like, oh, everything is very hectic. So I dug into that a little bit. And now that I have lowered my reviews per week and gotten to a more like healthy like pattern and pacing, I can still get content done. So I wrote 2 yesterday. And so I'm just like, add them to the buffer, and sort of keeping yourself scheduled and keeping yourself consistent is very helpful for managing this process. And if you start with good habits, it's much easier to maintain good habits than it is to say, be halfway through the process, have expectations from readers or publishers, and then suddenly be like, now is the hour that I will develop good habits.
That's great. And like you said, that's important for keeping that consistency and making it so that you can, get access to more games that maybe you couldn't. And that kind of feeds into our question here from Big Girl Games here. They want to know, how do startups get the important content creators to review or preview games? I guess this is from a publishing side here.
I will at least, not good answer to your question is you'd probably have to ask them. But the more fair answer to that is I think it's a question of audience. So the biggest thing that keeps me from reviewing certain games is timing and audience. So if someone emails me, and as it has happened in the past, let's say very generically, they're like, hey, Eric, we've got this Trump parody party game that's basically Cards Against Humanity that we think you're going to love. And I'm like, then I have done a bad job as a content creator letting you know that this is not a game that I would be interested in. It must be like, or you are casting too wide of a net here. Like, I think for a lot of them, like, I would not say, and this is mostly just me doing some napkin math, right? Like, I would not say that Rodney, Tom Vazel, like Suzanne, Mandy, like Girls Game Shelf or Board Game Blitz have like exactly the same board game preferences, right? That's why you kind of want to cast a wide net for reviews. But it also means that for a lot of things, they may not be the best fit for your content. And it may not even be that you need like a big name to like be a driving force for your content. As long as you've got a good relationship with whatever content creators you reach out to, you can still get a decent amount of traffic for your stuff. And a lot of times it's even that one review, even if it's a review from like a smaller creator or a smaller place, looks a lot better on your like Kickstarter page than no reviews, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So I think that there's also a process to gaining sort of the like recognition that you need to be able, like the recognition or clout to be able to talk to some of these larger groups and be like, we think this would be a good game for you or for your channel or for your content for these reasons. A lot of times you just see email blasts, and email blasts tend to get ignored largely because it's like there's similar levels of courtesy, right? Like it's sort of like someone shows up in the middle of town, they're like, anyone want to play this board game? Everyone hears them, but no one responds because it's too wide of a net. Whereas if you go to someone, you're like, hey, so I noticed that you play a lot of like family weight dexterity games. I'm actually planning on kickstarting one soon. It's similar to these ones that I think you've really enjoyed. Like demonstrate that you've also engaged with their content a bit. And I think that that's a good way to get people to be like, oh, this person actually like wants me as a content creator, not just any content creator.
Right.
A joke that I've used before is like, imagine you're going on a date, you sit down, the person that you're sitting across from is like, you know, I just wanted to go on a date with anyone, really. And you're like, oh, kind of takes the wind out of your sails a little bit. And I think that like finding good fits for your game is a lot like that. You need to demonstrate that you're interested. You need to demonstrate that you're knowledgeable about like their content. You need to demonstrate that you're like committed to also like essentially cross promotion, right? If they write a review and it's not necessarily the like review that you were hoping for, maybe there's something about the review that you can highlight. So like I've definitely played games that I haven't loved, but I don't like, at least I try not to. I don't think I take worse photos for games I don't love. That'd be odd. It's like a very specific energy. But I'd like to think that even if I didn't necessarily love your game in particular, that the photography might be something that you're like, you know, like, or the feedback might even be like, hey, you know, there's some good points about this game. You know, like the photography is worth looking at. Hope you enjoy the review, that sort of thing. It's always a little bit frustrating on the content side to do a fair bit of work, like getting a review ready for a publisher. And the publisher is just like, thank you for this gift. And then just sort of drops it on the ground.
Interesting. So yeah, the symbiotic relationship there is got to be really important. And I guess, like you're saying, it's a lot of legwork, right? If you're gonna go after, you know, the big fish, you got to figure out who they are, right? Figure out if your game's even right for them,
right? Because like also that's just not at a certain point it's not good for you, right? Like if you send someone a game that's not a good fit, not only are you more likely to get negative feedback on your stuff, you're also kind of not like you're not necessarily making the best use of what I assume are a limited pool of like review copies.
Right. And I was at a pitching event recently, and some advice some publishers were giving to, like, you know, some designers who were pitching was basically, remember that we're all human, you know? Yes, we're a publisher. Yes, it can feel like we hold your future in our hands, but we're just people. Just treat us like people, and you'll do fine.
And also, like, especially this year, weird life stuff happens. So there was a period where I didn't like, and I feel bad about this, but I didn't really respond to emails about review stuff for maybe 2 or 4 weeks because a United States election happened, and I had a lot of emotion about that. And also about 2 weeks later, I had a minor surgery that knocked me out for a couple weeks. And so like I have since tried to recap on that and like pop back up. But if you're not sure, the worst thing you'll get is you'll get a no, right? So if you're not hearing back from someone, follow up and just be like, hey, are you still interested in this? Is this something that would work? And yeah, like naturally you should also be prepared for the idea that not everyone is going to like your game, and that's fine. But I think that everyone, like your goal as a like publisher should be try to make it so that everyone can see why you felt like this was a good game to publish, right? That means there's something about it. Even if I don't like it, I might be able to say like, oh, you know, this game appeals to people who really like sort of high negative interaction gameplay where you can like really come in and just knock someone's stuff completely over. That's not my kind of game, but I think for people that like that sort of thing, this is a very good example of that genre.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a question here from Benita, who wants to know, Eric, where do you find the motivation to write 700 reviews? ?
I think I was talking to Carla about this, and she was joking that she was writing a blog post, and one thing that she was omitting was a quote in which I said, a lot of my motivation to do things is spite. And she was like, I probably shouldn't put that in there. I was like, I guess you probably shouldn't, but now I've said it on here, so I guess times have changed, Carla. Do whatever you want. But no, I think a lot of it is that it's the pattern of consistency. So once you get into a cycle, you kind of start doing things because you've been doing them for so long. It can cause problems. That's why some traditions are problematic, obviously, but it's also a good way to sort of keep yourself motivated is by just making it a regular part of your pattern and your process. So I'm like, okay, I am going to spend Saturday playing 3 or 4 games, doing photography for 2 of them, doing the write-up because I have a schedule that I'm trying to keep consistent to, and I am holding myself accountable to me. Like, my schedule is mine. I set my own deadlines, but this is important to me, and I want to make sure that I get it done.
Yeah.
After a certain point, once you've hit a certain number, you just kind of, you keep rolling, right? Like, I don't really process it as like 700 reviews. I process it as like, the joke I often make is like, for Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, it doesn't really matter how many times the boulder has fallen down or he started rolling it back up again because the rolling process is constant. Mm-hmm. And that's probably not the best way, the healthiest way to think about content creation, sure. But it is apt in its own way, right? A never-ending task, like the guideposts along a never-ending task do not necessarily like matter as much as milestones are a good way to keep yourself motivated. Mm-hmm. So like 700 is a big number. I'm really excited about it. Should be hitting it in 2.5 weeks by my own math. But well, yeah, 2.5 months or 2 Mondays from this Monday. But it's also just like, you know, at the end of the day, I'm excited about writing about games. I want to write more about games, and like I just kind of use that to keep myself motivated.
Yeah. What are there any tools that you have learned over the years? You know, those days when it's not an external struggle, it's an internal struggle to like write or to, you know, stick to that schedule that you set. What do you do in those scenarios? Do you just kind of like be like, you know what, today's a 0 day. That's fine, and I'll just do it tomorrow? Or
actually, yeah, I've had plenty, especially during the pandemic. I've had plenty of 0 days.
Yeah,
like, right. And I think that's an excellent point. Is that 0 days happen? They are a part of the process, and part of the reason you have the buffer is so that 0 days can happen. The worst thing you can do is do content creation because you feel like you're forced to do it. Mm. Like if you're like, if I don't do this, some external thing is going to happen. That's terrible. It makes for worse content. Like right. not in the like I have seen X and it is bad because of Y, but just in the sense of like if I have that pressure on me, it is going to end up being worse. It's going to be sloppier. That's exactly where corner cutting starts to happen. Is like fear of an external problem. Mm-hmm. If it's an intrinsic motivator, if I'm like I was talking to a friend yesterday and I was like, I'm going to get these 3 games played, these 3 games photographed, and reviews done for these 3 games. And then after a minute, I paused and I was like, I don't know why I'm committing to that because I'm not going to hit all 3 of them by the end of the day. And if I commit to 3 and I miss it, I'm going to feel bad. I'm going to commit to 1 of them. I'm going to do 1 of them. If I can get more done, it's a bonus. I got 2 done. So I did better than I thought I was going to do.
That's great. I love that. Setting real expectations for yourself. No limits, you know?
Right. And part of it's just that you are going to see those limits established, right? Yeah. Like there is going to be a point where you are getting more games in than you are getting out. And that's fine. Sometimes you play one of them, you post about it, and that's just like what happens with it. Sometimes they get a full review. Sometimes they get a mini review. Sometimes you just are like, this wasn't like, I played it. It's not a great fit content-wise for the work that I'm doing, but I will try to get like some content to engage with it done.
Yeah. We have another question here. Meeple Mountain wants to know, do you have a background in writing, schooling, or previous experience? I know you talked about a little bit in the beginning that you sort of just started. You just were interested in starting to write.
It's actually a super funny thing because it's actually, the snake is eating its own tail, but not in the direction that you would expect. I don't have a formal background in writing, but I have actually changed roles in my current job to more of a writing role as a result of the writing that I have already done over the past like 5 years, right? So like we're talking somewhere in the like 1 million word range, a little bit over 1 million words that I've like written on the site. And I actually found out that I really like writing. I like explaining it. I've done a little bit of teaching. And so teaching and curriculum construction is a writing task, but it's not quite the same thing as this. So like,
Mhm.
no, I'm not an award-winning novelist or something. I'm not like, I don't have any like secret fan fiction archives that you're going to come across, which is really sad for me to say, because like I kind of wish that I had that for other people. Like people are like, oh, look at this, it's Eric's entire like fan fiction library. I don't have those. Like, look for it if you want. It doesn't exist. I'm sorry.
Right. Maybe in the future.
Probably not. I don't really do like fiction. I prefer. I think what it is, it's like I prefer reading fiction a lot more than I prefer writing fiction. So I'd rather read someone else's writing. It's sort of the reason I don't do game design, is that I really like playing games. I don't really love playtesting, so the design process is very challenging for me.
Interesting. So was there any putting aside the writing, was there any part of the process of reviewing games that you had experience for? You know, you talked about teaching a little bit, coming up with curriculum, maybe like there's some kind of organization or consistency experience that you had that you brought into reviewing that helped you.
I did take a digital photography class in college. It was a 5-credit digital photography class offered through our computer science department, which stupid Eric, in all of his like we miss stupid Eric, may he rest in peace. But so before he died, he thought that 5 units of digital photography was a gimme class from the university, because it's like, oh, it's 5 full credits. That's one of the biggest unit loads you can take for a class. And it's just go out, take some photos. So I was like, why bother reading the textbook? Like, show up for section, do the work, you're going to be fine. And so there was a midterm and a final, and stupid Eric, again, may he rest in peace, may his memory be a blessing, etc. Was basically like, oh, well, like, why bother? So like he shows up for the midterm, and he realizes that it's an offer through the School of Engineering, which he probably should have noted was an issue. He didn't. And so on the midterm, he's looking at all of these questions about optics and how cameras work. Fresh-faced. So you know that nightmare that you have where you like get into a class and you sit down for an exam and you have never taken the class?
Yep.
Very close to what happened. So I think based on my rough understanding of how histograms work, I got the second lowest score in the class on that exam, which bless means that there is someone who showed up in an even worse state than I was. Right. I suspect it was my college roommate, because he left the exam 30 minutes into a 3-hour test. But
wow,
who knows? I never asked. Great dude though. But so
but yeah, so sort of interest in photography then?
I was very interested in photography. I just thought from the class that I wasn't good at it. Turns out I'm not good at optics, which that scans. I've always had a like tumultuous relationship with physics. Just both as a larger person affected by gravity, and also just like as a person trying to study physics.
I can relate to stupid Eric. Stupid Mike, when he was deciding what instrument to pick up for after school band, thought, well, the trumpet only has 3 notes. I could do that. It's got 3 buttons. The sax so many, the piano is so many. Forget that. All I have to learn is 3.
That seems right. I will share with you one more. The legend of stupid Eric goes back even further to high school, where I was taking an AP literature class, and the teacher was offering us our choice of books. We could pick basically any book from the AP English books list. And so I was like, okay, I need to decide between 2 books that I've never read before. One of them is The Stranger by Camus, and the other one is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Now, stupid Eric, I think, was birthed by the universe in this decision, because like I hadn't seen either book. I just said to myself, I don't know a whole lot about either book, but The Stranger sounds like a very long read, so I'm probably going to go with Crime and Punishment instead. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, Crime and Punishment is a classic of Russian literature. The Stranger is about 100 pages. So I found this out in college, where I actually had to read The Stranger for a different class, and I got a copy of The Stranger. I'm holding this like tiny little pamphlet in my hands, and I'm just like,
right.
I had to read Crime and Punishment for them. He shows up every now and then. He's sort of like the Mr. Mxyzptlk of my life, just like all of my bad decisions suddenly manifesting.
Right. You're reading Crime and Punishment, you're like, wow, I can't believe how long The Stranger must be if this is so
My AP English literature teacher just gave me a 96 out of 100 on my paper because she said she couldn't get through it because she couldn't tell enough of the characters apart. And I'm like, fair, I guess. Like that's some energy, but I appreciate the honesty.
Amazing. All right, let's go to another question here. We got Sarah from Big Girl Games coming back. Wants to know, do you do diversified content? Do you stream or podcast, etc., along with the writings? And then side question, should a content creator focus on just one platform?
It depends on what you want to do, right? So I think that Ross of More Games Please does a great job both on Twitch and with his photography. So he's kind of bifurcated that on two angles. I do a little bit of video for Late Night Table Talk, which is a new show that I just started because I'm stuck at home and I have very little else to do, in all honesty. But I would say that it depends on what you see yourself doing long term. So I would say don't pick up projects and then drop them. That's not good for consistency. But if you want to say, I'm going to commit to I could very easily review every other week, and the weeks that I'm off, I do video content. And that's fine. It's still consistent, it's just different. There are folks that do a video series and a podcast series. There are folks that do live plays, and I know that Danny of Variable Player Power, Danny Plays Games on Twitter, does a lot in the tabletop RPG community and TikTok. And variable player power. So that's 3 different things. If you can, however you feel most comfortable maintaining a certain sense of consistency, you can totally do. You can do a different thing every week. So you can be like, this is my monthly review, this is my monthly video series, this is my monthly live stream, etc.
I love that focuses on the personal goals, right? And not capital G goal that everybody should have, which is to be the most well-known person in all of board gaming, right? It's just what do you want to do? I love that. That's fantastic. That's great.
I feel like if you're setting your own standards for what you want to do, you're only ever really going to be accountable to yourself, and that makes it a lot easier to experiment even. So I don't think that Late Night Table Talk is going to become the most watched thing in the industry. I make it because I have fun doing it, and I get to call people that I like, and we get to sit down and just talk for an hour.
Right. Yeah, that's got to be at the heart of everything you do, right? It's is you enjoy it.
Yeah.
You enjoy it. That's great. All right, Meeple Mountain has another question. Do you ever publish content other than reviews? I guess they're talking about written articles, editorials, things like that. Do you ever?
Sometimes, very rarely. So occasionally, I did a really fun interview with Quan Chai, famed board game artist, known for many different games, all of just Kodama, Capital Lux, so many flip ships, tons of stuff, really. Love his stuff. Recently. Oh yeah. Tony's game. Yeah, that one looks really fun. So I did an interview with him for his poster in the Fireball Island series. I've done. I very occasionally do con recaps. That stuff is much less consistent, so it's filed I think under either con recaps or other stuff on my site. Because sometimes I'm I would like to do this. Sometimes I'm I have done this and it's fine. I think for more interview focused stuff, I'm probably going to do more interviewing on Late Night Table Talk, and I'll probably keep my written site to mostly reviews, just because the way that the WordPress layout is, it's kind of hard to put things that aren't a review photo in that section and have it not be weird with the rest of the formatting. So I just tend to keep it to this stuff goes here, the other stuff goes there.
Yeah. So speaking of Late Night Table Talk, we got a question from Radiant. How important do you think various aspects of YouTube production quality are? So microphone quality, picture quality, visual set dressing.
I'm only making a face because I'm just oh, I am the cheapest. I think I have a $20 Garbo microphone. I have a nice webcam. It's got a little ring light.
So not super important is what I'm hearing?
Visuals and set dressing. Welcome to my set. It is this angle. I think it is. I mean, this is where I'll put on my hates Eric hat and be maybe that's the reason they don't have that many views. But in all seriousness, I think that it definitely helps and makes it look more professional. If looking professional is your goal, Late Night Table Talk's goal is not looking professional, or rather, a non-goal is looking professional. If
Right.
I want to look professional, I can. I just don't feel like doing that. So I think that for like, I would say though that like, if you want to like say something and you don't think the visuals are that important, podcasting is kind of for that, right? Like just the audio of it. If you want to say something but don't want anyone to hear what you sound like,
Mm-hmm.
written content is always the way to go for that. You're like, oh, no one should ever see me or hear me. And that was a lot of the energy that went into written content in the first place. But I would say that the larger answer about it is they are important for a certain level of like quality control, but I would be remiss in not pointing out the like old statement or the old adage of like a shoddy craftsman blames his tools.
Sure.
Like you can make great content with like an iPhone and like panache.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think that there's a lot to be done there. And you see a lot of it on TikTok, right? Like a lot of people are not using their like, yes, welcome to my TikTok studio, sponsored by Monster Energy or whatever.
Right.
I assume they sponsor TikToks, but same energy.
Yeah.
But I would say it's totally fine to, especially if you're getting started. Like you don't need to say, oh, I'm going to invest in a 3-camera 4K Ultra HD setup for $3,000. Then you're like, I am now bored of this. I need to sell off all of my stuff.
Yeah. Oh, oh my gosh.
Sometimes you get bored.
Yeah. 100%. And that applies to so many different things that you do, is like, start small and then grow organically from there. You might, like you said, all that equipment you just bought, you're going to have to return or sell.
Also, like, imagine how funny it's going to be once you have started and you make it big, and in 10 years, you've got all of these, like, shaky phone camera videos of you being like, yo, what up? It's me, your boy. Welcome back to my board game channel, etc.
Right.
It's going to be heartwarming. So, like, just do low fidelity stuff until you get a feel for your voice and how you want to set things up. And if you're ready to commit hard to making this like high quality professional content, you can. You just may or may not need to.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. We got another question here from Tiz. How do you adapt to players that struggle with reading or focusing when it comes to crucial information? So I think maybe they're referring to rules here.
This is actually a really good question, though. So like, this actually has changed up my style pretty consistently, because this is a place where I was actually doing a bad thing. So I was assuming that the best way for everyone to learn the rules was for me to explain it to them, which has its own problems because I skim when I read, and so I occasionally miss things that I then realize later, and then I win, and people are like, you never told us that, and I'm like, but the main problem here is that there are definitely people who have like differences in how they hear, how they perceive information, how they retain information, that make it sometimes easier to just be like, hey, before we play this game, can I ask everyone, what is your preferred method for learning the rules of the game? And if someone's like, oh, I actually like to just read the rule book myself and I can read it pretty quickly, I'm like, oh, okay, here you go. Like, I already know the game, so I'll just explain it to these folks while you read the rule book. If someone else is like, oh, I actually need to read the rule book as well, I'm like, that's perfectly fine. Can I explain the rules to you, and then we can play like a short like love letter or something while we're waiting for them to finish the rules? That's also fine. The important thing is basically just norming that it's okay to be like open about the best way for you to learn a game, because at the end of the day, I am not emotionally that invested in reading the rules to you. I actually hate doing it. I had a very good friend who was our like rules guy back when we lived together, and he would always explain the rules. He did it perfectly. And now I am just sort of like constantly in the shadow of his light being like, no, Jonathan, please come back and explain the rules to my friends. But I think being upfront about your needs there helps the person who's like trying to host and plan be like, oh, I did not know that. I'm so sorry. Like, I have a friend now who best learns rules by reading the rule book. So when we're playing on Tabletopia, I just send her a link to the rules, then we both read it independently. And that means that we have actually a better shot of catching each other on like light rules mistakes, because we've both already gone over it. Whereas me reading it to you means that any rules mistake that I've made and internalized, you are getting. Like, you are going to accept that as gospel. And I would say 80% of games I play wrong, at least in some way, at least once.
Sure. How do you think that translates to the written review? You know, when you have to get across someone who maybe's never heard the game, and you got to, you know, explain how it works so you can give context to your review.
Mhm.
How do you or do you sort of like put that into effect of like, you know, when if people do struggle with reading that kind of stuff or focusing on that portion of it?
I think if people struggle with like reading, like especially if reading content is something that is difficult for you, I don't think that my written content is going to be like the best fit for what you're looking for, right? Content wise, right? That's why you've got things like Paul Grogan or Rodney doing like how to play videos, right? It's a different way for people to learn how to play the game. The problem is, like anything else, I'm not necessarily saying that those in particular have mistakes, but rather like I have written mistakes into my own rules explanations on my site before, and someone's been like, I think it's actually supposed to be like this. I'm like, what? No, I played this game 50 times. The penguin catcher always starts in the same room as oh my God. And so you realize after 50 plays of Ice School, you've been playing it wrong, which is fine. We changed it up. We now play the correct way. It's still fun. Yeah, I love that game. Right. But yeah, it's basically just that like there is always the risk when you're going off of. I mean, even rulebooks have errors, right? That's why errata exist and why like V1.1s of rulebooks exist. I usually tell people that like rules are just a set of guidelines that the designer has created for how to use the box that you have to have a fun experience. The fun experience that you may have with these components may not necessarily be the same one as the designer intended, but as long as you are still having fun, then you have mostly accomplished the goal, right?
Yeah. That's great.
Like, yeah. There's I think on Habitats, we found out we were playing the game wrong and played the game wrong maybe like 10 times. But we actually kind of liked our wrong play. And so we just included that as a like, Eric's I didn't read the rules very well the first time hard mode variant.
Right. There is kind of like I don't know if you call it nostalgia necessarily, but like, yeah, if you do learn a game incorrectly and then you're like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I like it the other way, you know, like that's totally a thing.
Yeah, I will say though, I was reading a thread from Elizabeth Hargrave on Twitter, and I will say that if you have house rules and I agree with Elizabeth, don't bother the designer with your house rules. Like, don't go to the designer and be like, I've heard it's actually played better this way. That's extremely rude.
Yeah.
It's wildly rude. Me showing up at your house, you've cooked me dinner. I think it needs more salt. You haven't tried it
yet. 1 star on BGG. So we'll go through. We've got actually a lot of comments. People saying you're lying. You have a fan fiction archive.
That's. I mean, prove it. Go find it. Welcome to the Westing game, you jerks.
People saying RIP.
I wish I had a fan fiction archive. Jeez, can you imagine? People just finding it? Treasure trove?
Man, the more you say it, the more it sounds like you're hinting that people should look for it.
The thing is, I don't have one. I'm just kind of I'm regretting that I brought it up and I don't have one. I'm just like, oh man, I wish I had a secret one so that people had something to find. Like it would be like this whole like, we found it.
I don't know. Eric doth protest too much, it sounds like.
That's definitely true.
People are giving you comments. Light Night is so great. They love it.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah. We got a question here from Amanda who wants to know, what are your other hobbies?
What? I don't have other. I kid. I refer to this as my jobby, which is a terrible word. But thank you, capitalism, hustle culture, for letting me monetize my hobby for very little. So other hobbies, what I tell people is I really like stories. So I like to consume media in basically all of its forms. So reading, watching TV, watching movies, playing video games, like occasionally listening to stuff. I don't listen to stuff as much as I usually do because I tend to like music more than I like podcasts. And also nobody commutes anymore. And I've heard from many other podcast creators that the lack of commuting has like tanked people's podcast views, which is a really interesting and specific bummer, but still a bummer nonetheless. What else do I do for fun? I cook occasionally. I've gotten like good at some like light pandemic recipes. But beyond that, I'm more into like media. In a simpler time, I used to hang out with friends, but no one really knows what that means anymore. So
right. we've got let's see, we got a lot more comments here about teaching games, and people always forgetting one critical rule at the beginning of the teach. So
the important thing is make sure that that's the critical rule that you then win by, because your friends will respect you more for it. They'll be like, oh, if Eric had told us that rule, we too could have won, but he kept it from us unintentionally in a way that is in no manner suspicious.
Yep. Oh gosh, that's my brand. Like I got a little anxiety from you just saying that, because I was like, every time I play a game with someone, it's always like, what are you doing right now? It's like, oh, I'm doing this. Didn't I tell you this?
Yeah, sorry, you didn't know that you could move these 3 pieces into this exact configuration, which unlocks the Holy Ankh, and that allows you to instantly win the game. Like, they look like you're just drawing Exodia from the middle of your deck, and you're like, yeah, that's where the cards are. Like, I marked them at the start of the game. I could just pull them out of my deck to form Exodia, and now I win. And they're like,
yeah.
No. I apologize to everyone that I've ever played a game with.
We've got a question here. Do you ever play a game and then realize it's not a good fit to review? And I'll add on to this. Has this ever happened with something that you've been sort of contracted to do?
Yeah, so I will at least take issue with the word contracted. Unfortunately, since it's a hobby industry, we don't have much in the way of like content creator contracts, which is itself dicey. But
agreed then.
Generally I try to honor my commitments if I can follow through on it. Largely, I will say that some publishers are just very much the energy of like, if you play it, that's great. If you post about it, that's better. If you review it, that's the best. And I like, and that is fine, because I try to make sure that I'm like going through them, but also the realities of time are that unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I am a finite being. And so I cannot necessarily play every game that I am set for review. Jonathan of Geek Dad actually really helped me out with that thinking a little while ago, where he was talking about the difference between like review and review consideration. It's just like getting sent a game for review consideration means that you will do your best to review it if it's a good fit, but it's not necessarily always going to be a good fit. I think that part of it's if you're writing about a game and it's just not a good fit for you to review, it's harder to write about. Like, it's harder to make the content. So like for me, it's like, oh, I noticed that like I could probably time it. If I was playing a game that I was really excited about writing a review, either positive or negative, it takes me half the time that it takes for a game that I feel middling about. And sometimes it's tough. Generally, though, I will try to follow through on commitment. Like if I have made an explicit commitment, especially around like Kickstarter stuff, I will try my best to either review it, or in some cases, I will email back to the publisher and be like, hey, I tried it. I don't think it's a good fit for my site for these reasons. I'm happy to forward it along to someone else, and I apologize for the mismatch.
Yeah. So when you do review consideration, are you able to do that with just maybe like the rules in front of you and some images?
I try to. It doesn't always work, and sometimes like you kind of want to expand your horizons. Sometimes you may ask to see games that you don't necessarily know if they're going to be a good fit or not, because you're trying to see if maybe this is a genre that you've taken for granted. So for instance, like actually right behind me, I've got Dominations, right? Dominations, as you might tell from my personal brand, is like a 2 or 3 hour game. I have a known thing where people generally expect that I don't play that many long games, mostly because they're harder to review. But no, I had quite a good time with Dominations. I think it's a lot of fun. It's just complicated. Yeah, it's just a chunk of a game. Like you're like, I need to get these resources, get these mastery cards, use the mastery cards to shape the direction of my civilization, be my civilization tree. I'm building monuments, etc. It just takes a while.
Right.
Yeah. Since I'm doing fewer reviews a week, it's actually easier for me to do write-ups of longer games, because you can't I don't think I could do 4,000 plus word reviews of 2 to 3 hour games in a week's time. I just don't think I have again, unfortunately, I am a finite being. But I think the best thing that you can do, to loop back around to the original question, is if you find that's not a good fit, just be open and upfront about it. There may be some we wish you had told us sooner, or we wish you'd let us know in advance. And of course, they would people would like to be alerted in advance this isn't a good fit. That doesn't always happen, but as long as you're honest about it and you try to do the best that you can, generally I have found that people are understanding, because as you said, Mike, we're all people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting more comments about people looking and finding your fan fiction, and I want
if they find it, let me know, because that will be a surprise to me. But
yep. I want to put out there that somebody please just write a bunch under the pseudonym of Eric Yurko and just hide it like a treasure hunt in the internet.
Oh yeah, if you want any suggestions, I've got a lot of suggestions for fan fiction that I would potentially write, but all of that is out of scope for today's conversation, probably.
Right.
So yeah, sorry.
Separate live stream.
Yeah, it's a $20 a month Patreon tier.
There you go.
Finally, me monetizing that fan fiction.
Oh, that's wonderful. So we are actually doing great on time here, but we're getting close to the end. So if you have any last minute questions, please post them in the chat now. Let me ask a couple questions myself here. When you start writing out, like you said, review games you already own, right? And write with what you know. When you start getting consistent and more, sort of bigger and bigger, you're able to sort of get games now or things like that. Mm-hmm. Is there a point where you should be monetizing this? Do you know what I mean? Like, at what point does that kind of happen? And what's that process look like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that question depends on a lot of different factors, and it's usually the answer is it's different for everyone. Yeah. The primary methods of monetization that I have seen are usually in the forms of like paid sponsorships, paid preview content, or rush content, monetizing some non-editorial aspects. So like I sell some of my photos, or the rights to my photos to some publishers sometimes at some rates, or Patreon, Ko-fi. I've only ever seen it written out. I'm so sorry.
So I'm probably wrong too.
Maybe Wi-Fi, something like that. Yeah. But anyways, or other like content monetization platforms. I have not yet seen anyone reading their written content on YouTube and then monetizing the content in sort of a like, you come down and I'm in like a big like robe by the fire and like an armchair. I'm like, oh, hello, I didn't see you there. Today we'll be covering Gates of Mara, and I just read I might actually, seems like a good, like if I had the right setup and I did it for Christmas, I feel like that would be a really fun thing. But also like
good season for it.
Yeah, this is not a good content monetization idea. Just so we're all on the same page. Not me like don't do it because I want to. It's just not a good idea. But I think that the place is basically, when does it, and this is a terrible answer and I apologize, but when does it feel right for you to do it? Sure. So a friend of mine, Joe Sandow, basically I was weighing the pros and cons of doing a Patreon. He's like, you should do a Patreon. He's like, what? And I was like, if you're considering doing a Patreon, that means you should do a Patreon. Mm-hmm. Like, it's sort of the like imposter syndrome of content monetization. So a lot of folks, especially folks who are traditionally more vulnerable to imposter syndrome, won't start the content monetization process because they don't think they'll make any money off of it. And they don't want to be in a spot where someone comes along and they're like, is that your Patreon making $0? Ha!
Yeah, sure.
Like, by and large, if that happens, it's possible that will change eventually. Mm-hmm. I would say like setting some of that stuff up so that if you want to monetize your content, you have the option of doing so is fine. But also like the thing that's very important and very worth mentioning is that it is very, very, very hard and very, very, very rare to be able to make a full-time job out of a content creation position in the board game industry. Just right. Very clearly, do not go into this with that as your primary goal. Yeah. Maybe you're coming in from a different industry and you've got tons of experience with content, you've got tons of experience with monetization, you can make the networking you need to do, you can get everything done. Great. If that happens for you, I am super stoked for you. It is by and large unlikely. So do it for you. Do it because you like the content that you're making. And if it happens, if the opportunity presents itself, great. It does not usually happen. So I don't want to come in here on like, I don't want anyone to misinterpret and have it be like, oh, Eric's promising that like, if I start writing on, I don't know, if I start a YouTube channel, I'll be able to make $1 million a month. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. Like, yeah. No, and that's true across the board too. I mean, you don't go into designing games either to make a ton of money, or even publishing. Right. Really, I mean,
yeah. At least in the reviewer circles, we always talk about when we're going to get that payday from Big Cardboard, and like, right. We're like, oh man, one of these days I'm finally going to be able to cash out all 700 of my reviews with Big Cardboard.
Right. Yeah. The president of Board Games comes down and hands you the check.
Yeah, just like a big check too. It's like to Eric for being great at reviews, and the check just has an infinity sign where the money should. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, quad fold. It's big. It's big.
Yeah, there's like a whole ceremony for it. He gives me a medal, and he's like, "You are the hero of board games." Right. Yeah, it's a lower likelihood event, but I'm still planning for it. I have my speech written.
There you go.
It's in my fan fiction archive.
And I was going to say this is a perfect place to finish this out. I want to go through just a couple of the comments as we're closing out here. People are saying that it's pronounced like coffee.
Okay, that makes sense.
So thank you.
I was like, is it pronounced like Kofi Annan, the former Secretary General of the United Nations? And I was like,
yeah, he started it. Yep, that's it.
It's Pots. Like, unfortunately, I'm a tiny bit gullible, so I'm like, if you had told me that like straight face, I'd have been like, oh, well, I see no reason not to believe you, and I don't want to contradict you on your live stream. So, okay.
Some people, Meeple Mountain has suggested Eric Yurko, Masterpiece Theater. So I think that's a great.
If I drank more wine, I feel like I would definitely have a whole thing where I could just be like holding a Merlot and being like, tonight we'll be covering.
Right. I would love. I mean, honestly, no one does it, so it's a void there that you can fill.
True. But so is like Eric pours a bottle of ranch dressing over a copy of Dominion. No one does it. It doesn't mean that it should be done.
Well, for any of you thinking about getting into content creation, that might be your angle. If that's something you enjoy, I would say go for it. I'd watch that.
Yep.
And people are just people are talking about the president of Cardboard and all this stuff. They're giving love to you. Well, this has been great, Eric. As we close out, where can people find you? I'm going to put you in the chat.
Yeah. So if you want to read the site, that's what'sericplaying.com. If you're interested in more of if you're interested in this level of conversation, which is mostly the nightmares that live inside of my brain being manifested in the real world, you can find that on Twitter at twitter.com/what'splaying. For the reason I mentioned earlier in the chat of 15 character limits and What's Eric Playing being 16 characters. If you just want to look at photography and never hear from me again, which I respect, Instagram.com/what'sericplaying is the place to find all of my photos. So photos of games in progress, occasionally photos of other stuff, but almost always board games. Yeah. And then if you're interested in late night table talk, I think it's on YouTube. I'm not good enough at YouTube to have a good sense of where things are. I really want to say, and I'm going to try it now. Maybe it works. Let's see here. This is a very exciting thing to do on. Oops, I just typed it wrong. This is a very exciting thing to do on a live stream. I apologize to everyone. Okay, let's try the backup option. See, if YouTube were like every other social media site, it would be very easy to find it. But just search for What's Eric Playing on YouTube, and you'll find it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Me being great at YouTube. Good thing this wasn't live or anything.
Yeah. Well, Eric, thank you again so much for doing this and
absolutely
for rounding out our speaker series so wonderfully. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. I had a really good time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope our viewers out there got some great info. If you're thinking about starting up content creation, now you know kind of what it takes, the direction you might be headed. And remember, we're all human, and all choices are personal choices, right? And write what you know.
Yeah. And do it for you. That's the big thing at the end of the day is you are already going to be your biggest critic. So you need to make sure that you're your biggest advocate and your biggest fan as well. You need to make stuff that you're proud of. And once you're proud of it, it doesn't necessarily you will have the fortitude necessary to be like, I am proud of this content. I'm ready to share it with other people. Even if it is just you filling a Dominion box with ranch dressing. If you carry yourself with that energy, no man or God can stop you, I think is probably the right way to think about that particular one.
That's wonderful. That's a great note to end on.
Is it?
Wonderful. Wonderful.
You're like, maybe.
Well, I want to thank our sponsors for this whole speaker series, New Voices in Gaming and Tabletop Network. This whole thing would not have happened without you. So thank you so much for sponsoring this. And again, thank you, Eric, so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And congratulations on 700 reviews.
Thanks. We're getting there. And you too. Hope you have a great rest of your day as well.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.